It's really brilliant to see all of you here today, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and to help facilitate today's session. I'll just begin by saying just a few words about the origins of the Balanced Life project, and then explain the running order for this morning's symposium. So the project itself, the main objective of it is to really help young people in particular to structure their lives in a sustainable and balanced way. And that's the kind of big mission behind it. The project itself is supported by the lay community of St. Benedict's. And it came initially, and I remember because I was there living with my dad at the time. Adam watched Brené Brown's TED Talk on the power of vulnerability. And he's not like most people, because most people watch it and be moved and that's it. But of course, Dad turned it into a project. And he was really struck by the way that she spoke about the sort of our deepest human needs, and found a language to talk about it. And so that really got him thinking about, you know, what are our needs, and in particular the needs of young people, and how can the lay community of St. Benedict's help our young people to really kind of meet those deepest needs. So out of that grew a framework, and he set about doing a survey in which he surveyed about 70 young people, and asked them a whole series of questions about, you know, the things that got them out of bed in the morning, and, you know, the things that they were looking for. And it was those responses that really informed this Balanced Life framework, which is based around 4 areas of focus. And those areas are, firstly, finding purpose. Secondly, making connections and forming good relationships. Thirdly, cultivating healthy habits. And finally, and perhaps in some ways most importantly, and perhaps, you know, we'll have the chance to talk about this, making a positive impact on the world. So once that framework was established, we had a retreat in January of 2020, which was brilliant. Some of us on the call were there. And then an essay competition was launched in autumn 2020, inviting young people to really reflect on key aspects of that Balanced Life framework as it related to their personal circumstances and personal lives. And so that produced 36 essays. And out of those 36 essays, 4 essay winners were selected by a panel of judges. So it's brilliant to have those 4 essay winners here today, and we're going to hear from them in a minute. I think the only final thing I'd say really is that this feels like a very timely moment, because it's almost a year since the first lockdown. And, you know, this project started before COVID, before we even knew it was a thing. But I think definitely the experience of COVID, the experience of lockdown, has almost given it a new richness and a new meaning. And we definitely saw that in the essays that were written. You know, we saw the sort of profound experiences actually that people had through the difficulties around COVID, and sort of, you know, the inner searching that I think COVID has led a lot of us to do. So I think that is a sort of one of the positives, you know, to have come out of what is for very many people a difficult experience. So I will pause there. In terms of the plan for the next couple of hours, so it's basically in 2 parts. The first part, we'll get to hear from our essay winners, and that will be sort of led in conversation with Mathieu. And then that will be followed by some reflections by Kate, who has read all of the essays, and who will kind of take us deeper into, you know, what we can learn from it, and in particular how it relates to this Balanced Life framework. At 11 o'clock, we'll then move into our second part, which will be a chance for us to all to go into breakout rooms, where we can talk in a bit more of an intimate setting about some of the questions raised around the Balanced Life and how it means, you know, how it sort of relates to us. So that will be led by some facilitators, which will be really good. And then we will come back into the main room, have a chance to do a bit of a debrief, and then we'll hear from our guest speaker, Timothy Radcliffe, who I'm really looking forward to hearing from on the topic of dialogue and decisions. And then we'll hear a final word from Adam about next steps, and we will aim to finish at midday. So that's the plan for the next few hours. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you're not speaking, please can you go on mute? If you've got any questions for the organisers, do feel free to use the chat bar. That function should be enabled. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Mathieu. So Mathieu did a huge amount of the work behind this essay competition, and he is going to be leading a conversation with our essay winners. So over to Mathieu.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Catherine. So it's really wonderful to have all 4 of our essay winners with us today. When I read through all 36 essays at the end of last year, I felt that there were just so many nuggets of wisdom in them, and it's just really fantastic to have the opportunity to make some of those nuggets of wisdom available to a wider audience. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to have a look at how the essay winners have addressed the 4 pillars of the balanced life that we've just heard about. So I've got some questions for each of you. And I'll also be trying to keep a lookout on seeing if any of the other essay winners want to rebound off of what's been said. But you can also signal that to me by using Zoom's hand raising feature. So we're going to start with the pillar of relationships. So interestingly, it's at least amongst the winning essays in particular, the pillar of relationships is the one that I felt featured the most prominently, even for those of you that didn't choose that as your focus question. But 2 of you did choose the pillar of relationships as your focus question. So Michael, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you. And in your essay, I really liked your treatment of a concept of momentum in propelling us forward, and as momentum as being necessary to make lasting change. And personally, I'm someone who's struggled with a limiting belief in the past of that things need to be perfect before I can really kind of move forward and make progress. So your notion and discussion about momentum to keeping us going was very useful to me. And you specifically wrote about how we can rely on others for this momentum. So I was hoping that you could give us some examples of what this might look like in practice, or some of the things that you've done in this regard. And maybe before you answer, if you could just give a very quick introduction to the audience.
Yeah, thanks for letting me go first. That puts a lot of pressure on when I.
Sorry, Mike, I think we're on mute.
Oh, when, like Timothy mentioned, I've only just got out of bed. So yeah, thank you everyone for organising this. Thank you, Catherine, Mathieu, Adam, Barbara, etc. It's been really fun to engage with this. So I'm looking forward to this symposium. I'm Michael Livesey, and I wrote the essay about finding momentum as a way to find balance. And it's interesting to hear your thoughts, Mathieu, in terms of perfection and being constrained by perfection. I think perfection can be a bit of a trap sometimes. You kind of trap yourself by looking for perfection when really that's kind of a chimera anyway. And we kind of need to learn how to understand what's good enough when what we've done is good enough, and learn how to feel what good enough kind of feels like and looks like as well. And I mentioned in my essay one of the kind of systems that I've set up with my colleagues, my peer group during lockdown, which is these kind of weekly, we call them crit sessions, where we send something round the group that we've been working on, and then we get a chance to discuss it as a group. And one thing I've noticed is that often other people's perception of what is good enough is more accurate than mine when we're talking about my work. You know, other people have a better feeling of what's good enough than you do when you're assessing yourself and your productivity. So learning to kind of crowdsource that sense of momentum has been really useful and powerful, just to kind of get me through the work that I've been doing during lockdown. And on the other hand, obviously that implies a responsibility to the people that you're working with as well, in terms of not only are you crowdsourcing your momentum from others, but you're also helping to contribute to their momentum. And I think there's a really powerful thing there about service to your colleagues and service to your friends, and the kind of the energy and the grace that you can get from that, and the power of enabling other people with their work as well, and the responsibility you have to others.
Yeah, and I think that links quite nicely with the way that you rounded off your essay, in terms of trying to think about a balanced life more in terms of we than in terms of me. So is there anything more that you'd like to say about that, in terms of how the focus on the we can kind of help us can pull us, in a sense, kind of pull us towards something greater than us, rather than us always trying to push ourselves?
Yeah, one of the things that's happened in my life since I wrote the essay is I've been diagnosed with myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome. And basically it's the symptoms are just feeling tired all the time, and probably looking like you've only just woken up half the time. But part of that diagnosis process is getting guidance from medical professionals, and reading up on the condition. And really the key to managing the condition is learning to manage your energy levels. And what's kind of written in the guidance about that is part of that is restricting your expenditure of energy on kind of social interactions and things like that. But then on the other hand, I think you can get a lot of energy from interacting with other people. And I've spoken to a lot of people who have said, they just feel exhausted all the time in lockdown, and they feel like their life is kind of out of kilter, even though we're all not really doing anything. We're just spending our lives indoors all the time and not really seeing anyone, not really doing anything. So there's no real logic to why we feel tired. I think that points to the fact that you can get energy from other people, and that can help kind of structure your life. And collectivizing your journey is an important kind of thing to aim for. But that's not something that's going to happen automatically. And I've seen a lot of times people talking about lockdown saying, the kind of nature is bouncing back thing. In reality, the things that we've learned from lockdown in terms of looking after the planet or looking after ourselves, if you want to continue them after the lockdown, you have to put the systems in place to enable that. And things like these weekly crit sessions I've been talking about, but also some other things that I've been doing, and things that other people I'm sure have been doing. Things like these sessions that Adam has been organising, in instituting those systems in your life to enable you to collectivise your journey with other people, I think, is how you can achieve that. Great,
wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Mike. And that actually links to some of the things that I read in Hannah's essay. So Hannah, in your essay, one of the points that you make is how this physical isolation that we've all been put through has prompted many of us to compensate for this lack of interaction by getting on lots of video calls, only to realize that that type of interaction can also become tiring. And so because it's new to us and we're not used to it, and it's very intense and full on. So what do you think this we can learn from that? The fact that we've been missing this connection, and we try to get it through these digital means, and that in itself kind of can make us feel a bit perplexed or a bit overwhelmed. What can we make of that?
I think we need to engage with particularly the disabled community and disability activists, because they've been they're really the pioneers in terms of how you build community online and how you cultivate genuine connection, relationships and friendships. And in so many of the debates that have been happening, particularly on social media, about how we do church in a time of lockdown, for so many people who have been, for so many reasons, unable to physically get to church, online has been their place, has been their home, and they have the tools, they have the wisdom for how we navigate both the online and the offline world, and how we resist that dichotomy of, well, what happens in person is real versus what happens online is somehow not real. and there's so much we can learn from them about what it means to be an embodied self in the virtual sphere, without kind of, you know, capitulating to Zoom fatigue and, you know, screen eyes and what have you.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, maybe before I go further, could you just tell the audience just a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, so I'm a Church of England ordinand, PhD student in theology, and was part of the Community of St Anselm, which is the Archbishop of Canterbury's quasi-monastic experiment for young people. So a bit of an interloper, but thank you for having me.
Great. And you know, one of the stories that you recounted in your essay, you were reflecting on your decision to call a dear friend of yours at 3 a.m. in the morning as you were going through a really challenging time. Would you mind taking us through that thought process of that led you to call a friend at 3 a.m.?
Yeah, so at the height of lockdown, my then fiance had a ruptured appendix, and because of lockdown, it went misdiagnosed. So by the time he finally got it diagnosed, it had become peritonitis, and he was going in septic shock. And I received a phone call in the early hours of the morning from his surgeon saying, you need to say goodbye because he's probably not going to make it. And so at the time I started reading through the Psalms, and I was really struck by all these times when David, or whoever was the writer, sort of saying, I'm so alone, I'm completely alone. And in that sort of moment, God being there, but also saying, you are not alone, pick up the phone and call Laura, who's a friend of mine. And there were kind of two things at work within my kind of very unbalanced soul at the time. One was that kind of, deep crying out to deep and knowing that, there was somebody at the end of the phone and that God was with me. And on the other hand, there was that kind of very melodramatic, very distraught part going, well, I'm going to call and she's not going to answer. And you know what, God, it's going to prove that you're mean and everything's awful and my life is absolutely falling apart right now. And I called her and she answered, and we prayed, and it was just that act of her leaving her phone on and being willing, and being open to receiving a call knowing that I was going through a really tough time. It was just a phenomenal thing of going, oh my goodness, aren't people a gift? And isn't it wonderful that God gifts us people? And my husband survived, so it does have a happy ending.
Yeah, no, it's great that you clarify that, because at some points in reading the essays, I wasn't sure, what had happened to your fiance and whether he had made it. So it was quite interesting the way that you had written that up. Something else I wanted to ask you, Hannah, is on the act of choosing a friend. It's something that you focused on towards the end of your essay, and can you tell us a bit more about what this means, this act of choice?
So in the rule of life lived by the Community of St Anselm, part of it is about desire and choice. And as part of the commitment ceremony, you say to this group of strangers, I choose you for this period that we're together as a community. I choose you. I say that without knowing you, without knowing whether we're going to be personality types who get along, without knowing your politics, your religious proclivities, your foibles. And it's incredibly liberating to choose people on the basis of these are people made in the image of God. So how could I not choose somebody who's a vessel of Christ? But then to receive that as well. There's that bit in Charlie Maxey's wonderful book where the mole says, I can't believe you chose me when you didn't know me, and now you know me and you love me even more. Like, it's phenomenal that's how freeing that is. And reflecting on how, in the essay I quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer's poem about friendship. And Bonhoeffer is his theology of marriage is terrible. Don't follow his theology of marriage. His theology of friendship, however, stunning, so rich, so textured, so much better for building a marriage upon. But there's just that sense of intentionality behind it. And I reflected in the essay about how we have these liturgies for how we, for our marriages, but we don't for our friendships. And yet they're such a vital part of what it means to be human, such a vital part of, building community. And live, Jesus had friends, like he wasn't a loner. We are made for friendship. And how do we, kind of cultivating that habit of choice, daily choosing our friends, I think makes up for the absence of kind of liturgies and ceremonies which solidify those relationships, those covenants.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting the way you articulated that. So thank you. Scott, I'm going to move over to you. Maybe could you just give a quick intro to the audience about your background?
Yep, I'm Scott Coleman. I'm a seminarian for the Diocese of Arundel and Brighton. I'm a second year at the moment at St John's Seminary in Wonersh, which I've got to via a roundabout sort of way, but I'm here and happy while this seminary is open before moving to Allen Hall in Chelsea next year.
Great. And in your essay, the question that you chose to focus on was the question about making an impact. And one of the things that you said, which I thought was very interesting and which also hit home to me personally, which is the need to, some of us consider ourselves kind of anywheres is the term that you use of we've been traveling and we've got all these different identities and sometimes not always feeling grounded in a particularly strong way, and which is something that I can definitely relate to in my past. So can you tell us a bit more about what this means to you personally and why you think we shouldn't get too comfortable with being anywheres?
So for me, it's been a wonderful thing. I'm 30 now, and so I suppose for 12 years or so since I had left home to go to university, I've just been moving around for perhaps 2 years at a time in a place, but maybe only 1 year. And there's been something really wonderful about that, the chance to meet different people, to experience different cultures, to live in different countries, to learn different languages. All of these things are so enriching and so enjoyable. And for me, they've been a pleasure. For other people, those sorts of things might be a necessity even. They can be something that's really important. But one sort of realizes that can't go on forever. There's a limit to that, really, because we need relationships and community, and those things require stability, really, I think is the word that sort of forms the basis of all of this. And that stability, I think, really seems to be based on a sort of a two-way commitment. It's the commitment that we make to a place, to a community, to a group of people, and the commitment that they make in return to us. And it's that kind of gives our life, I think, a sense of grounding and a sense of purpose and stability from which we can then go and do all of this exploring. And perhaps in my personal case, I'm very fortunate in that my family and my friends have been kind of, in a sense, that stability for me. So that even though I've been moving around, I've always had a kind of a rock to go back to, you might put it that way. But for many people in communities around this country, around the world, that sort of sense of stability can be so much harder to find. If there is unemployment or structural change or social change or something, all of these things can force us into a less secure, a more mobile, but perhaps a kind of less pleasant world in which people can't put down roots. And that sort of balance is something that we need to look at, I think, individually in each of our lives, but more broadly in terms of community, in terms of government, and so on.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that I picked up on in the end of your essay. So to you, your reflection wasn't just about how do I make an impact personally, but how can we reorganize our communities and our societies to be ordered towards making an impact. So I suppose at the you've spoken a bit about the individual level, but at a more how do you think we should be the kind of principles for which we need to maybe think about our communities or societies a bit differently so that they are ordered kind of more properly towards making an impact?
Yeah, so I think part of the problem is the sense of productivity in a kind of in a rigorous economic sense. And I mean, I don't want to appear sort of fantastical or sort of unworldly about that. The economy matters, productivity matters. That's what funds and what enables us to do all of these things. So it's not about kind of holding back the tide of change or being sort of Luddite about it. But it is about recognizing that individuals and communities are not just economically productive. And therefore, so to take the example of technological change, which renders certain jobs obsolete, but opens up other avenues. I think what we need to do is look in terms of accepting that change, of facilitating it, but of making it happen in a good way that actually supports people, rather than just kind of expects them to move with the times in a way that perhaps they're unable to. And that works, I think, on a particular level in terms of communities. As we see that some are able to really embrace these changes in certain parts of the country, in certain parts of London even, and really race with it. But we're sort of left with other places that are perhaps less able. I think one of the things that strikes me particularly is the poverty in a lot of coastal towns around the UK, which are based on seasonal work, perhaps tourism, those sorts of industries, which have been particularly affected by COVID. But more broadly than that, it's about recognizing that those places have a value in themselves, and therefore, they need support, whether that's financial or otherwise. But that there's something sort of particular about community and individuality as well as economic productivity.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Scott. And I'm now going to move over to Christina. So you chose to write an essay which focused on healthy habits, which was maybe the pillar that most people in the competition chose to write about. But your take was particularly interesting, in which I felt that you really brought along all of the pillars into your response. So maybe could you just tell the audience a bit about yourself and your interest in the Balanced Life essay competition?
Yeah, so my name is Christina. I grew up in the lay community of St Benedict, so I know many of you here, but not all of you. I have been in anywhere, as Scott described. I've done a lot of different things and lived in a lot of different places, including, most significantly for this conversation, a year spent living in Chile with the Movimiento Apostólico Manquehue, or the Manquehue Apostolic Movement, which is based in Santiago in Chile. I lived there for a year, about 10 years ago, and it was an absolutely incredible year, if a very difficult one. The Benedictine lifestyle is one of radical obedience, and that is quite difficult when you are 21 and British and fairly independent. So it was a very challenging year, but one that has been a real treasure to me throughout my life since. It's the year that I go back to most often. Right now, I am a mother to a 2-year-old and a wife to a husband. We live in Hertfordshire, and since writing the essay, at the time I wrote it, I was a full-time mum. But right now, I am the centre manager for the local Christians Against Poverty debt centre. And that's me.
Great, thank you. And what was really interesting, well, there are many interesting things about your essay, but one of them in particular was the notion that being part of a community, and in your case, the Manquehue community, it really helped to give you, well, to basically facilitate and maintain healthy habits. So what lessons do you think we can learn from communities such as the Manquehue community that you immerse yourself into and that can help us develop and maintain good habits?
I was thinking about this, and the thing that's unique about a religious community, whether it's monastic or a lay community like the MAM, is that there is a mutual commitment, which is something that Scott and Hannah have also alluded to. There's that mutual agreement that we are in this together and we're going to stick it out. They live incredibly closely, and they also have an explicit commitment to the same way of life. It's codified. And that is something that not many of us have in our lives. Even where we live in families or with housemates, we still are unlikely to have that level of explicit commitment to the same way of life. So that makes it quite a challenge to have that same community support to live this balanced life. So I think the thing that helps me in our family is to have this sense, what I call a cloister, as a principle that's come from the Mankewe movement. And that is, it's in a traditional monastery, you would have a physical cloister, which would define the boundaries of your life. It's where you would live, it's where you would work, it's where you spend your time, and it's very physically controlled as a space. As a lay person, my cloister is the daily round of my life. It's where I go in the day. It might include the school run or the supermarket or work. It's going to include all those different places. And the idea is that it's a protected space where I can meet with God. So I carefully consider, who do I let into my cloister? Who are the people that I'm going to welcome inside that cloister? What things am I going to bring into it? What information? That's been a real challenge for me to think about over the last year in particular. And where is it? And as lockdown lifted, with lockdown, it was quite easy because the government defined my cloister for me. Whereas right now I'm having to work out where are the boundaries going to be in a post-lockdown world, with a new job, with a new nursery, all these different new elements that have been introduced. And it's the key question for me to think about is it bringing me closer to God? And then if it is, then that's cloister.
Yeah, and I really liked your discussion about the cloister, and in particular about how it helped you to give a new meaning to the limited spaces that you had access to, and they were no longer seen as limiting, but actually something that would facilitate an encounter with God. So I thought that was very powerful, and I was wondering if this kind of reframing, are there other situations in lockdown where you felt that a kind of reframing of a situation from like, oh, this seems really bad, but actually something good can come out of it?
Yeah, I think the cloister is the main thing, and it's kind of transformed a lot of the way I think about things. Like in the past, if you told me that my adventures would be confined to the local area, I would have found that really challenging, because like I've already said, I'm an anywhere, I'm an adventurer. I've lived in Chile. The idea, like, adventure is somewhere else, and so to have the idea that adventure could be on my doorstep, that's been a really interesting experience over the last year. And the thing I've found most interesting is that instead of seeing the world as out there, I have found a new world right here. We've done the same walk. There's a field of llamas about a mile away, and we've done that walk I don't know how many times in the last year. And in the process, I have got to know so much of that walk. Instead of it just being, us and the llamas, I've learnt the names of the trees on the way. I've learnt to recognize the flowers. I have learnt my neighbors' names because they're all doing the same walk. I've discovered, instead of it, I've reframed what adventure means, I suppose. And I've discovered that there is a world right here that I can explore and adventure in.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Christina. And thanks to all 4 of our essay winners for your contributions in your essays and today. And for everyone listening, the essays are available on the Balanced Life Project webpage on the LCSB website. So I'm now going to hand back over to Catherine, or actually hand back over to Catherine. Yeah.
Thanks so much. That was absolutely brilliant. And I have to say, an amazing synergy actually between all 4 of you. From Mike, it's not just me, but it's we. And then, Chris, we're in this together, the idea of that cloister and coming closer to God. I thought as well, like hearing from Hannah about the reminder that our we is a big we. So it's, looking around to the disabled and learning from different elements of our community, and then Scott, you know, talking about how community is much bigger than the economy, you know, and how we kind of support each other and how we're more than just our you know, productivity. I thought that was just absolutely brilliant and all great food for thought. So I will hand over to Kate now, who's been doing some thinking about the Balanced Life framework and is going to talk us through it. So over to Kate.
Thanks very much, Catherine. And it's interesting to follow that, because all I really have to offer is no more wisdom than what I got from the essays and from the essay writers. And, you know, that really came through in that dialogue there. So really enjoyed that. Thank you. But maybe just to draw this into a little bit closer into what the Balanced Life project it can do about these things that we're talking about, which is, you know, the things that we recognize that we need. So I suppose, yeah, I think that the thing is that there's enough wisdom to act upon. The question is just how the Balanced Life is going to be able is going to bring that out in the project. The thing that I suppose dawned on me looking at these essays was the immensity of practical wisdom that people were able to offer. You know, I'm someone who sort of drifts around the fringes of academic theology, and often that kind of practical wisdom and putting it into action is something that I really struggle with. So it's quite I suppose it made me recognize why something like the Balanced Life and this kind of input is something that actually I, for one, really need, but also I think a lot of young people really are looking for, which is its main objective is saying how, you know, how do we do this? So yes, we've got these ways of thinking. We're working through this practical wisdom. You know, how do we actually put that into practice? And that's something that, you know, really comes from, as Catherine mentioned earlier, Adam has this amazing propulsion, this drive to help people get those tools and those resources. And so it really struck me thinking about these things that's an exciting momentum, to use that word again, to hold on to and to invest in, and to really draw upon those gifts. So what I did in the paper was to try and find a way of gathering together some of the different kinds of thinking that were going on, but also in a way that really recognized the differences and the really genuine distinctions between different ways that this comes out in people's lives, so that forward momentum to put it into practice doesn't become a kind of false peace or a false unity, the sense that there is a single way of finding the balanced life, but really to invest in you know, what this looks like on a practical level in the individual instances that are being explored through these essays. So I was wary about generalizing and coming to any kind of general conclusions, but I was also looking for patterns, because, you know, it was my objective was to bring some of these things together. And that was why, looking at the essays, the thing that really struck me most was this repetition of the contemplation of time, thinking about the way we use our time, which isn't really anything extraordinary, because we all know that finding balance is going to be about organizing our time partly and thinking about time. And we all know that we want to, you know, value this kind of time over that kind of time, and we talk about it a lot. But the really interesting difference was that these were essays which were written by people who had not just thought about it, but were experiencing a completely new way of living, of being in time. And that was what was coming out. So there were reflections not just about how I would like to use my time, but about what, you know, a complete revaluation of time. How do I value what I'm doing with the time given to me? And that's partly come about because the kinds of values that we have been expected to give to the way we use our time have been disrupted. So, you know, things like this intense need to value ourselves through, as Scott brought up, through productivity, and this kind of instrumentalizing of time has been knocked off. And not, you know, it's accidental that this has happened. You know, it's not that we've chosen that. it's just happened to society that we've been knocked off that model of time, and because of being knocked off that and giving the people, the contributors, the essay contributors, the impetus to really reflect on that experience of being knocked off a model of time, has sort of brought out these amazing reflections on people changing their sense of value, or recognizing things that they valued but they hadn't put into action before. So I think that really struck me as a point of focus for the Balanced Life project, is thinking, how do we use this as a gift and transform it into a protecting, those new values of time as we move out of pandemic, or as we move into whatever is coming next. This thinking is, not original and not from me, but what I was really feeling like was happening here was drawing some of the thinking that's gone on in Laudato Si, Fratelli Tutti, Let Us Dream, and seeing it come through in these essays. So it's sort of bringing these two things together. Because these are things that Pope Francis talks about a lot, in terms of creating an imaginative resistance to the way that we are being told to value our time, and part that's in large part because the way we're told to value our time, of course, feeds back into the way we value ourselves and each other. So there's a really essential resistance that needs to take place on a practical level. I suppose the three, to give a brief summary, the three key things that I wanted to look at in reflecting on these essays was partly that reimagining, that imaginative resistance to time as we've been told to value it. Also thinking about some of the things that had not been mentioned, not necessarily because they weren't being thought about, but maybe because it's not relevant to the task, or because people think about it but they're not sure how to express it, but just thinking about those things. And so one of the things I've thought about there is some of the absences from the essays, and one of those is talking about the future in a really in a way that it really tries to consider long-term impact of our lives. There's quite only 2 essays I think really addressed this idea of the global impact, and it really felt like there was a struggle to think about the future in a meaningful way, and in a way that can be practically applied in our lives. So those were 2 things that I was addressing, but I also was looking at another absence, which was talking about sin. And I say that with a bit of a grin, because I know that this is a word that has can have a slightly jarring effect. I mean, I know there's lots of people here for whom it's really familiar, but we know that it has this slightly jarring effect, especially it can seem quite exclusive, and it comes with all these connotations of judgment and shame and things that we don't want to encourage in our thinking. But the reason that I thought it was a notable absence was because people were talking about it, but they just weren't naming it. And I think one of the, when we're thinking about value, which is coming back to this idea of time and valuing time, we're thinking about value, we're already being told to think of things in terms of what are virtues and what are sins, but we just don't name them as such, So it's, for example, there was an account by a nurse who was talking about really struggling to find balance, because there was such an intense pressure to be busy, with work, quite rightly, as in, it was something that was seemingly unavoidable, that just a hectic shift schedule and things like that. But then she said this amazing thing, which was, I learned to take the time for myself without feeling selfish. And so there's a sense of, this is an implied sin by the society that's around us, but it's just not named as that. But we're still being asked to think of it as something that is us being fallible, something we should be ashamed of, something like that. And I think that actually talking about why these words have been part of the, you know, our thinking about practical wisdom and thinking about moral action and how we should act is really helpful, because it avoids us thinking about them without knowing we're thinking about them, and thinking about them in ways that are actually unhelpful. So I sort of wanted to bring that out as well. Yeah, but I suppose to think about, rather than just to ramble, which is a tendency that I have, but to think more about how the balanced life brings this into practical action. I think going back to time, one of the things that came through was this need to protect time as we move into, you know, and move out of the pandemic. But also, I think there's a way that there's this translation gap between how we spend time on retreats and this sense of, you know, how we spend time in these separated parts of our life that are prayer and worship or whatever it might be, and going back into being a teacher and having all the pressures on you that involves, and or being a nurse or whatever it might be. And it's really difficult to make that connection between the life of the retreat and coming back into real the busyness of life. And I think that the balanced life is offering a way of bringing those two things closer together. But I think also that really relies on some things highlighted in Rowan Williams' talk that I mentioned in the paper, which is accountability and honesty. So, you know, when I left university, became a full-time teacher without training, just sort of thrown in to the deep end. And I was reflecting on this. At that time, would I have wanted the Balanced Life project? Would I have got involved with it in that extremely busy time of my life? And I thought probably not. And the reason would have been because I would be too busy. And it wouldn't be because I didn't, you know, want the benefits of it, but just because I'd be too busy to think about it. And I think that sense that the Balanced Life project, it's one of the movements or the action points going forward is how can we be a community that was being spoken about earlier, that reaches out to people to help them protect their time actively, you know, not just giving ideas that are sort of separated out. We can think about on retreats, but not bring back into our lives. So that kind of active accountability that comes from community, and that active asking and investment in people's time is one sort of action point, I think. Also really, you know, encouraging the thinking of not just how do I spend my time, but how do I value my time is an important action point. I think the other thing is that I've encouraged in the paper, the Balanced Life project to do next is to think about the different kinds of life that they're serving. So that going back to that diversity in the essays is, you know, what does balance actually look like? In what way is balance a good in particular lives, not just in and of itself, you know, because we might have shared definition, a sort of roughly shared definition of balance that we can share across a community. But the problem is thinking, is balance in itself a good, or is it good if it's seeking a greater good? And that's, you know, only going to be helpful for people if you're applying it to specific kinds of life. And it's interesting that in the Benedictine Rule, the Rule of St. Benedict, the first thing he does is distinguish different kinds of monks. And okay, fair enough, he's partly doing that to say these monks have no stability and they can't have balance. But it's this sense of a distinction between kinds of life, and what is and is not helpful, as well, what are and are not helpful tools and resources for those specific kinds of life. So I think the next action point as well is to make these efforts to go out to who exactly are serving as a project, and what shape do their lives take, and what particular tools do they need. So I think asking what do you need in your life is a really good question to be asking next. The last thing I'll talk about then is just coming back to this idea of framing healthy habits, and really all pillars of the life in virtue. I think that this is a really helpful pool of wisdom to draw upon from theological tradition and formation and teaching, which is for two reasons. One is to really explore why that language is lost and why it's exclusive, and to not, to ask people why that is. So if you're here now listening to this and thinking, you're just going on about sin a bit too much, why does that jar with us? Why does that, why are those no longer helpful tools for us to really evaluate our actions and how we're putting things into practical action? With the purpose of opening the community up and really trying to engage with those who we might not immediately be able to speak to in a community setting. So, trying to reach out and draw people in. And the second thing is that sin and virtue, that I think they both bring us back to thinking of ourselves as beings in time with a full narrative that is the narrative of our character, and not just someone who makes this choice or that choice, separated out, but really trying to bring in that unity, that sense of, I am someone who has this extended self-narrative, this history, and this sense of process and change. And I think that I'm going to leave Timothy to talk about impact, really, because that's the subject of his talk, and he's much more capable of talking about it than I am. But that I think thinking about your life, your purpose and sense of virtue is this building of slow processes of change, and this is what the habit, the way that the word habit is used theologically, is rather than colloquially, the way we usually use it, is this slow turning of the disposition towards what's really good for you in particular, for your kind of life and for your character, rather than what's good generally, what does society generally think is good for me, what's good in terms of this system of morality that I'm being told to follow. It's more this process of learning about yourself over time. So learning healthy habits, for example, which is one of the pillars, if we frame it in this sense of learning good habits in order to become virtuous, which is to say, in order to become more who we truly are, then we have a sense of, in thinking about choices and thinking about the way that we act, which is resistant to this instant, make a choice about this, make a choice about that, the anywhere sort of mentality, move here, move there, because it's about investing in this long narrative. So I think that's really sort of, I'll wrap up there to say that that's how some of my thinking came together, but really centering on this reflection of how do I value my time, or more to the point, I suppose, how do I love the time that's given to me, which is one of the questions I think we might be asking later. But just remains to say thank you so much to the essay writers for the extraordinary wisdom that I gained from reading your essays. I really thoroughly enjoyed them. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Kate. That was really, really thought-provoking, and lots in there. I think lots of questions for all of us, including how do I spend and value my time, but also questions for us as a community. How can we be a community that helps people outside to protect their time actively? How can we reach out to others? And then I really liked what you said at the end about the fact that, really this kind of finding a balanced life, it's not like this this kind of perfect model outside we're looking to follow. It's more about, having the tools to become really who you truly are. And that for me just rang so true. And, this sort of idea that balance is a good only if it's kind of seeking that greater good. So if it's helping us to be who we truly are and kind of fulfilled, both individually, but also as a community. So thank you so much, Kate. And thanks for all of the work that you've put into developing this concept and framework. So we are almost at 11 o'clock. Which is great. So we're now going to move into the second part of our symposium, which will give all of us a chance to enter a bit more deeply into some of the questions raised so far in smaller groups. So we'll have you with us. So thank you very much for joining. And I think you've got about 20 minutes to speak to us. So look forward to it, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. So I'm Timothy. I'm a Dominican. There are odd noises going on outside my window, and it's some sort of machine to do with squirrels. I can't work out whether it's inviting squirrels in or trying to tell the squirrels to go away. But anyway, if you hear odd sounds, then it's not the brethren hammering on the door. I was asked to say something about conversation, dialogue, and decision making. And I must admit, after this fascinating morning, I would really like to start all over again and think about it. But we've just been told to let go and let God. So that's what I've got to do at this moment. Yesterday, I spent some time reading Kate's absolutely fascinating paper. And that really provoked fresh thoughts. And I was struck, Kate, by how you stressed the whole question of time, the experience of time in the pandemic, the gift of time, the invitation to waste time, to structure time fruitfully. And I think this whole last year has seen a disintegration of our experience of time. Time shoots by, time drags its feet. Is it really a year since lockdown started? Sometimes I think it's 3 years, and sometimes I think it's only about 3 weeks. So what gives balance and hope to our experience of time? What makes it open to the future? That's the thing Kate underlined in her talk a few moments ago. And Kate pointed to an intriguing comment in one of the essays, I forget who wrote it, and the writer discovered that health was founded on attention to voices. We flourish humanly through conversation. We listen and we respond. And I would say that if I had to tell the story of my life, it would be the story of the conversations that I've had. Conversations with people that I love, and also conversations that have been difficult. Kate underlines the importance of difficult conversations. So time isn't impersonal. It isn't what Weber called the iron cage of modernity. Time is structured by encounter. And it's the remembrance of encounters in the past, and it's the anticipation of encounters to come. And that's how we live in hope. When we talk to the people that we love, eternity breaks through. We are touched by the ultimate goal, a little glimpse of the final joy. I think in the conversation with our friends, we glimpse the final patria, the homeland, our ultimate destination. But time during this lockdown, I don't know about for you, but for me, time has gone peculiar, because I don't know when I'm next going to be able to hug the people that I love, and when I'm next going to be able to sit down with them and have a drink and see their faces properly, rather than staring at them, you know, through Zoom until I feel my eyeballs are going to pop out of my head. And for a Christian, of course, time pivots around the great encounter, the Word made flesh, that gives us our BC and our AD, our Anno Domini. And next week, on the 25th, we're going to celebrate when the Archangel Gabriel burst into the home of that young woman, Mary, ignoring all COVID restrictions and not even wearing a mask. And their conversation is the turning point of our lives, what gives hope to us all. There's a wonderful sermon by St. Bernard of Clairvaux, in which, while Mary is wondering how to reply, the whole of creation is saying, what's she going to say? Is she going to say yes, you know? And then Mary says, let it be done unto me according to your word. And everybody, all the angels go, phew, thanks be to God for that. Hope shines. Now, I loved reading all these essays because I really wanted to talk with every one of the essayists. I wanted to say, how interesting. I never thought of that. I'm not sure about that. Can we explore that together? And I think that the best conversations, which really balance us and in a certain sense unbalance us, it's like a spontaneous musical interaction with chords and riffs and disharmonies leading to a final resolution and happy silence. So I think a good conversation is like playing jazz together. You've got to have enough agreement for there to be communication, and you have to have enough disagreement for it to be exciting and playful and to take you know not where. It has to be liberated from aggression. Good friction is okay. I don't know whether any of you saw that wonderful TV series, The Queen's Gambit. And it's about this young American girl who becomes enamored of chess. And you see her progress as she smashes one male chess player after another, until finally she meets the great Russian master and she smashes him as well. All these men laid out flat, you know, and we all cheer. And then when she's in the car on the way to the airport to fly home to have dinner with the President of the United States, she stops the car. She sees a little group of old men playing chess. She goes on, she joins in, and the final words of the whole TV series are, let's play. And I think that all conversation is about play. I think balance is about play and being put off balance and rediscovering new balance. Wisdom played before the face of God when she made the world. One of my best friends in the order was called Gareth Moore. He was a brilliant philosopher, linguist, musician, computer programmer, you name it. I mean, it was enough to drive you crazy. But how we loved to argue, the fun of it. Once I went to his room at 10 o'clock at night to ask him if he would say mass for the sisters up the road the next morning, and we got into an argument. And suddenly we realized that the sun had risen. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, and we'd argued all night. And we didn't even have anything to drink, unusually for Dominicans. Now, I think that our global culture is not very good at fruitful, playful, hopeful disagreement. Because the algorithms of Facebook and Google steer you towards people who think just like you. They trap you in, what is it they call the echo chambers, mental bubbles. And so we Twitter, and conversation is reduced to sort of tribal squeaks without any nuance or without any depth. I can't resist quoting from Tom Rackman's evocation of these little enclosed tribal talks. He said, consider the catchphrases that ooze cynicism and passivity. It is what it is, whatever. You do you, you do you. Haters gonna hate, which mean nothing else, he said, except that if somebody opposes your view, you should write them off. Don't argue, simply shut them out. Hold to your comfy in-group. Close your eyes, plug your ears, and hum loudly till they have left. But first, take a peep at your newsfeed. There's another meme waiting, and it is hilarious. And I think it's through conversations, the joy, the struggle, the balance, the imbalance, that we are led to the decisions that shape our lives. And since Adam told me I had to bring in decisions, that's just going to be my way of doing it. And conversations, you see, I think, lead us to decisions, not just by seeing the pros and the cons, you know, becoming a Dominican if you're very, very lucky, or a member of the lay community of St. Benedict, or like Scott, you know, becoming a seminarian. Profound conversations transform who you are, and therefore what you must do. You open yourself to another, and you become with them something that you never ever were before. Which is why we need many partners, we need many interlocutors, because each friendship brings into existence an aspect of you that never existed before, and therefore some new sense of what you're called to do and to be. When I was a young Dominican, I was sent to study in Paris for a year, and I was terrified because my French was and is not very good. But it was a transformative experience. It changed who I am, because I used to pretend to be a little bit French. I would go to the cafe and have my little cup of coffee and read Le Monde and smoke a Gareth cigarettes. They were disgusting, of course, but they were all part of the game. Pretentious, moi. But it was I had to be changed. And in changing, I became open to new moral demands, you might say. The most exciting experience of my life was on the General Council of the Dominican Order. 14 of us from 14 nationalities, from 5 continents. It transformed me. I became a new person. So imagine what it's like to talk to God. That's going to unbalance your life. Because the very life of God is the eternal, equal, loving conversation of the Trinity. Revelation is not God saying, down on your knees, Radcliffe, obey. Bertrand Russell said that the 10 Commandments were like an exam. You know, no candidate should attempt more than 4. I always get relieved when you get to the last commandment, where it says that one should not covet one's neighbor's donkey. Thanks be to God, I've never coveted anybody's donkey. Your donkey is safe with me. Revelation is not commands from on high. Revelation is having a conversation with God. Herbert McCabe, one of my Dominican brothers, said, learning about the Trinity, it's like a child going into a pub and listening to this dazzling conversation of grown-ups. And there's teasing, there's parody, there's laughter. And we're like that as we're taken into God's eternal conversation. And time revolves the moment when you say the word became flesh. You could say the conversation became flesh in this Jew 2,000 years ago who talked to everybody. You know, he talked to the sex workers and the hedge fund managers, or as they said in those days, the prostitutes and the tax collectors, to the Jews and the Gentiles and the disreputable. I suspect actually Jesus enjoyed talking to the disreputable probably more than anybody else. And it comes to a silence on the cross. And that's the moment where the word speaks most powerfully. But then in the garden on Easter morning, the conversation takes off again when Mary meets a stranger who she thinks is the gardener, Mary Rabboni. Conversation with God unbalances us because it takes us into the mystery of the divine. In the traditional language of the early church, it divinizes us. So our lives take new directions, not because we have new instructions, but because we become new people. You see, one of the themes of Kate's wonderful paper, which I read yesterday, was difficult conversations. Difficult conversations which liberate us from false understandings of who we are. Difficult conversations with God, sometimes angry ones, in which we are transformed in our sense of ourselves. Think of Jesus's conversation with the rich young man. Jesus invites him to leave his wealth and to follow him, but the rich man does not. And this is not because he refuses to obey Jesus. It's because he hasn't yet grown out of a self-conception of himself as a rich young man. He hasn't yet discovered a deeper identity. And to stop, just in case you're all getting nervous, think lastly of that extraordinary conversation that Jesus has with the Samaritan woman at the well. Crazier than any conversation we're ever likely to have. In fact, the woman does not think they should be talking anyway. What are you, a Jew, talking with me, a Gentile, a Samaritan? She's triply forced outside conversation because she is a woman, a Samaritan, and probably a public sinner. But they talk. This is the challenge for every one of us, to have these difficult conversations. They talk. And it all begins, as every good conversation does, with Jesus saying, "Give me something to drink." Jesus is needy. She wants something from him. So we have to talk to these obstreperous people, and each of us can name their own group, because they have something that we need. Blessed Pierre Claverie, the Dominican Bishop of Oran, who was beatified, he was martyred in Algeria. He liked to say of his dialogue with Islam, "J'ai besoin de la vérité des autres." I've need of the truth of others. Even if I disagree with them, I need them to help me discover a new balance. I need them to unbalance me from where I am now. And Jesus and the woman listen. Imagine them alone, the heat of the day, every sense strained open as they listen. Alice Stewart Miller said, "You can listen like a blank wall or like a splendid auditorium where every sound comes back fuller and richer." It's a crazy sort of conversation with non sequiturs. It's like something from a novel by Dostoevsky. But it takes off the moment when he breaks through her aggression with a word that touches the rawness of her life. "Go and call your husband to come here." "I haven't got a husband." "You're right in saying I have no husband, for you've got 5 husbands. And the one you're with now isn't your husband anyway." And now they really meet in the truth of who she is, the truth of who he is. And she will say, "He told me everything I ever did." And conversation takes off when we dare to engage with others the truth of who they are, the truth of who we are. When we're disclosed to each other in our raw messiness. And the conversation is even a bit flirtatious, you know. Lovers traditionally meet at wellheads. Any real conversation is going to be perilous because you're letting someone else into the core of your being. You're becoming vulnerable to them in the heart of who you are. And they will challenge who you think you are. That's why I was fascinated when Christina talked about the protected space, the cloister, which you both need and maybe need to leave sometimes. So this is my final question to you. Would we dare to have conversations that reach across the polarities of the cultural wars? Would we dare to have conversations with people with whom we profoundly disagree? With somebody maybe who's mildly racist or misogynist? How can men and women talk to each other easily after the death of Sarah Everard? Yet talk there must be. Sometimes I'm not ready for it. Sometimes I must go to my cloister, my enclosed space. Somebody else will engage in the conversation. But in the end, we hope, we trust that conversation will happen, which will bring healing and hope to time. The Lord never was afraid to engage in conversation with anybody at all. If we do talk, we shall get hurt. But as Herbert Mackay famously said, if I love, I will get hurt. I may even be killed. But if I don't love, I'm dead already. And if we dare to have those difficult conversations, we shall discover who we are in the Lord, and therefore what decisions we must take, the next step to the kingdom, where, as St. John said, we shall see him as he is, and we shall become like him. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly powerful, and just so much in there. But for me, it was the challenge for the story of my life to be one of conversations, but particularly, truthful, vulnerable conversations, and how those can also lead us to the greatest conversation of all, in which, is that conversation with God, which, as you say, unbalances us, but in a good way. To find that new balance. So yeah, thank you so much. That's just given so much food for thought. And I think it would be great to continue the conversation, but obviously coming to a close now. But Adam is going to talk about next steps and the way that we can continue this conversation together. So over to you.
Well, thank you, Catherine. And I would like to just start off with a few thanks to people. So I'd like to thank Catherine for chairing today, to Mathieu for his very skillful questioning of our four wonderful essay writers, Hannah, Christina, Scott, and Michael, and thank them for engaging today so much. Kate, your research paper is amazing, and I hope if you haven't received it yet, everyone knows that they will get a copy of it. There is much food for thought there. Thank you so much, Joe, in the background, who's been hosting, and Father Timothy for today, for your amazing talk that we've just had. Thank you to the 36 essay writers who gave us so much inspiration. And thank you to my fellow LCSB members for their support in this project in so many ways. And lastly, thanks to all of you for coming today. Now, I'm going to end off with some concluding words to, as Catherine said, to talk about next steps. And I hope to pick up some of the things which have been said today. Before I do it, I'm going to give 1 minute. I'm afraid, Jutta, it can't be more than that. To Jutta Brooke, who is here and who has just been given a task of setting up a community in Suffolk. Jutta, would you like just to explain what your project is to everyone?
Adam, thank you. And what a gift to be here this morning. my life changed dramatically when I joined the lay community at Worth Abbey over 30 years ago. And my life is sort of reconnecting now. We've been given a convent in Norfolk, the community of All Hallows, who served young women there for 150 years, have given it to a group of youth workers who are reimagining life of prayer, community and service there. And my job is to form the residential community of people who will be living there, praying there, and at the center of offering hospitality to young people. We've got about up to 50 beds in that convent, which we are renovating. It's ecumenical, it's bespoke. And I am drawing sort of really widely networking to really have a broad backdrop against this. So if any of you want to find out more, go to our website, bewith.community. If any of you want to come and live in the community, please get in touch. So look at our website. Thank you.
Jutta, thank you very much. And it's wonderful to be able to share with others what you're doing. I think it's an amazing project that you're doing. So now for my concluding words, and dear Catherine, who's been so wonderful at keeping time. Catherine, I have to apologize to you. We might just go over by a couple of minutes, just as I draw things together. So the Balanced Life Project is an invitation. It is not a blueprint. It's an invitation into a safe space where young adults can exchange and meet each other. And based on today and our previous events, I think we're doing okay. It's a place of joy and community where quiet study, listening, questioning, and openness to change, diversity, rootedness, fun, work, meditation, and prayer are valued. It will be successful if this appeals to you, young adults. We as a community, the lay community of St. Benedict, are committed to finding a way to create that space and to work on the powerful recommendations in Kate's research paper. In terms of the next steps, here are a few suggestions. And we're going to send those to you in a follow-up email, so don't worry about noting them or anything like that. Just going to give you an idea about what the follow-ups are. Perhaps you could call this our raw messiness, which Timothy said, and also making the conversation flesh. How are we going to make this conversation actually happen? So the first thing, if you weren't aware, is that on Monday at 7 o'clock, we have the second evening of our young adults course, which Kate is giving. It's called Healthy Habits, Reading, Listening and Journaling. When we read the essays, we realized that one of the benefits of the COVID crisis was that many young people found that the act of writing was a very good way of articulating their feelings and dealing with the difficulties. So Kate, in this course, we've already had one, and I've had lovely feedback about it. She will encourage you to reflect on the writings of amazing spiritual writers and experiment with some of your own writing. Every Friday night, our young people host online Vespers at 6 o'clock. We've talked a lot about time and how we spend time. This is a little island of peace and reflection, and you're all welcome to join us. This is followed by a social. You don't have to come to Vespers, for young adults, and it's going to evolve into a space where we invite speakers and explore different themes. We have a young adults WhatsApp group, so please, if you're not on it, let us know if you want to be part of it. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook if you want to have something nice to see on those social media. And we're not on TikTok yet. On the 28th of March, which is tomorrow week, we have Rowan Williams speaking to the lay community as part of our 50th celebration, 50th anniversary celebrations. And he is a wonderful and wise person. And thanks to Tim that we had this introduction. So this will be on Zoom if you want to interact with him. or it'll be streamed live on Facebook if you just want to listen or catch up afterwards. On Good Friday and Easter Saturday morning, we have 2 talks by James Allison, described by Rowan Williams as one of the most creative of English language theologians. He is a wonderful speaker and deep thinker, and I highly recommend him. He spoke a few years ago, and all of the young people, teens and young adults, were really bowled over, I think we all were, by his scriptural reflections. We're also organising a session for James and the young adults. So this will be interesting for all, but particularly for those who feel on the margins or excluded. So James's life work was inspired by the French philosopher René Girard, who wrote about the place of the victim. And so Father Timothy's words, I need the truth of others. I need to engage with different people. James has applied this to a theology which includes all people marginalized by society and notably LGBT. And so I do recommend that session with James. And lastly, in the summer, we are in the early stages of planning, COVID permitting, to organize a Balanced Life Summer Week. We're not sure what form it will take. The sound of 50 beds in Norfolk sounds rather attractive, actually. But we can maybe have a chat about that, Jutta. We'd like to do something that would help you. I think one of the things I know that has always motivated me in everything I've done and what I've seen young adults doing is that it's just so good to do something which will help others. That's why people love going to Lourdes. We do a painting week at the Poor Clares in Arundel, and it's just this sense in which is part of the balance of life, isn't it, to be able to make an impact on others. So early stages, but we will let you know about it. So thank you for listening to me. Apologies for being a little bit over time. And I would just like to ask Father Timothy if he could give us a closing blessing.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, draw us ever more deeply into your life, that we may hear your word spoken to us in your Son, inviting us to live, and may be inhabited by your Spirit, the Spirit of love and the Spirit of truth, who will carry us forward in our journey to you, who are beyond all our thoughts and our words. Through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.